Let's talk about gear in NIKKE, specifically Overload, how to properly reroll your stats, what's the priority for 99% of the characters, and in general, mistakes to avoid, since it's been a while since we make a guide for this. As usual, hello dear mates, welcome back to Waifus. I am Sefhi, your favorite gambling addict, and today's topic, how not to waste 200 plus rocks on a single piece of gear like I did for Scarlet on a stream for the memes. So let's talk a little bit about gear because this is important. I'm gonna explain really quickly the basics and then we'll go into Overload and everything else. There is a written version of this on the website that has been updated recently, if you prefer that, of course. Now, let's start with the basic gear first, right? Just something basic for the new players in case you don't know, but when we talk about gear, you go from tier 1 all the way to tier 9 gear. Tier 1 to tier 9, right? Pretty simple. This gear, you can level it up at any point. In fact, you should be leveling up even the lower pieces of gear. So if I go to equipment, I don't have anything lower than probably tier 8. I'm assuming, yes, tier 8. Even a tier 8 piece, even a tier 5. 4, 3. You can level this up and you should because it gives you extra combat power. And after you are done with this piece and you updated this piece to whatever level you want to put it, right? You can use it as fodder for your next, let's say you got a tier 5 and then you got a tier 8. You can use your leveled up tier 5 to level up your tier 8 and you will gain around 80% of the experience you used to level that up. So you are not really losing a lot, it's a 20%, but the combat power it gives you for a new player is always important, right? Now that's it about leveling up the gear, which is a small detail a lot of players miss. Let's go into T9 gear and how to overload. As you all know, we need custom models, aka rocks, to overload your gear, and it has to be the same manufacturer as the character. So if I wanna overload Rupi, she is missing 2 pieces. She needs to have a helmet that is Tetra. It cannot be any other manufacturer, right? Pretty basic stuff. Let's go into the important, which is actually rolling and re-rolling these stats. I'm gonna put the example of Scarlet Black Shadow since I wasted literally 200 plus rocks on something I should not have on a stream because for a stream is free content. When you level up a piece of gear, you're gonna get up to 3 lines. This is not random per se. The first line is always guaranteed 100%. The second line, it's a 50% chance. And the third line is a 30% chance of getting 1 line. After you get the line, there's also randomness on what line you're getting, more RNG. Elemental, defense, critical damage, critical rate, charge speed, charge damage, etc. Right? There is no limitations. You can get charge speed and charge damage on characters that don't need that, which is stupid, but it is what it is. Now let's move into the most important stuff, which is when you should be locking these stats, how do you reroll these stats, and what's the priority as a general rule of thumb for, again, 99% of the characters. We're gonna start with the priority and then the reroll. If you are a new player, what lines should I be focusing on getting? Sefhi, I don't really understand how the characters work or how this works overall, right? Okay, let's open the blog here really quickly. These are our possible names for the Chinese account we're gonna be making, of course, on the Chinese server for NIKKE. So we can come here and we can talk about it. The priority for every character in the game, okay, it's elemental damage. Every character in the game. That is your priority for absolutely every unit. The second priority is attack. Everything else is kind of fillers. When we talk about charge speed or charge damage, right, that depends on the character. So it's a little bit harder to understand when you can use this or not. For example, my Black Shadow doesn't really benefit a lot from that piece that I wasted 150 plus rocks on, right? It's great, but it's not beast. So those are like kind of situational for the character and it depends what you're doing. Max ammo usually benefits every character unless it's something like Samiranis or Dorothy where they have a mechanic when we're talking about last bullet, right? Activates when fighting the last bullet, you want of course to avoid max ammunition. So both of them are situational. And then when we talk about critical rate and critical damage, right? Critical rate and damage, these are also situational. There are a few characters that really benefit from this in the game. NIKKE is the only gacha that I know that you don't build characters around critical damage and critical rate. Is there any other gacha that you guys know that is the same? Because as far as I know, NIKKE is one of the few ones, which is kind of weird, but it is what it is. And then hit rate is exactly the same. It is situational because not every character will benefit from actually getting hit rate. For those of you who don't know, hit rate only affects the characters that have, for example, SMGs and assault rifles. Everything else, hit rate is kind of wasted. Some shotguns can benefit from this, but for the most part, it's kind of wasted. And then you have the most useless stat in the game, which is defense. Some people doing PvP will get some defense lines. Again, that's for PvP and it's completely useless and wasted lines. So if you're a new player, what you should be focusing on getting is always elemental and attack. That is your priority, and that's simple to understand. So that said, let's move into, of course, when to reroll and when you should be locking. Because as you see here, I have a first line and second line lock, and this is what you should never do. To understand this, if you lock a first line, there is a 100% guarantee that you are always getting a first line. But the second and third is a 50% chance and a 30% chance of getting something. And we're not even talking about getting something useful, just getting a line there. So you should only lock third lines if it's a good line. If it's elemental or attack, it's the only way you should be locking a third line. For some characters, of course, it can also be charge speed. For example, for allies, if you get a good charge speed on the third line, you could be locking that, right? But for the most part, you only want to be locking this third line, which is the one I did not get. So in my case, I locked first. I locked the second one, which is a complete waste of resources because I had to spend more than 150 rocks just to get an elemental on the third line with this really bad percentage. So you only want to be locking. Let me see if we have another example here. Here, for example, this piece. This is charge speed, max ammo, and attack. This is not bad for Black Shadow, but I want to get elemental damage. So I only lock my attack and I will be re-rolling here until I get an elemental and something else. And then you could also lock the second line if it's something that's also meta for the character. But it's always going to be cheaper. For example, this piece, it will be cheaper for me to unlock these two and just re-roll to get a good third line and then re-roll based on the third line being locked. Because the amount of rocks you have to spend for a 30% chance and then also the RNG for a great line is too much. So TLDR, right? As a new player, you focus on elemental and attack. The other ones are situational based on the character. Feel free to ask always on the Discord or to any content creator on streams. They will always probably answer you. And then you only want to be locking the third line, maybe the second one if it's pretty good. So for example, an example of a good second line that is worth locking is on my Quincy right here. It's an elemental black line, right? I got that. So it's like, okay, as a black line elemental, we can lock this and then reroll for third and first line. But it is, even the second line, it's already kind of a waste of rocks considering how expensive it's going to be to get some great lines in there. So all in all, a short video to explain how to properly build your characters as an overall guide for new players. If you guys have any questions, feel free to leave them down below. As usual, love you all bosses. Thank you for supporting me. Thank you to all my coffee patrons for making this content possible. Links in the description if you want to join them. Good luck with your pool dinner dates. I'll see you in the next one.
役立たずは楽園から追放するのみ。ブランとノワールのショータイムです。天地万物を切るとはこういうことだ。